Well, Tom Burke is the chairperson for climate change think tank E3G, joins me in the studio now. And I don't suppose I've said anything there that you don't already know, but do we understand the magnitude of the threat from these fires?
I think we do in the headlines, but not as it were in the real world. So I think the picture is coming through pretty clearly, and not just fires. There are also hurricanes and floods as well. So there are a lot of extreme weather events, which are exactly what the scientists told us was going to happen. So I think what we're starting to see is governments, politicians, at least paying attention, but they're not translating that into really aggressive enough action to stop the problem getting worse.
What is the appropriate response to this?
Stop burning fossil fuels. Actually, it's quite straightforward in a way. We already have the technology that if we wanted to deploy it rapidly, we could...
If we wanted to?
Yes. And
but it would be expensive.
Probably, actually, Citibank came up with a study a couple of years ago that showed even then it was probably cheaper to go low carbon than high carbon. But you would, of course, change the pattern of winners and losers, which is what really puts the politicians off. And, of course, since Citibank came up with that study, the cost of renewables have gone down further. So, actually, I think the balance of advantage in terms of cost would be to go for low carbon. But that requires very big social change.
Until then, is there anything that can be done?
Well, several things that can be done. First of all, I think you've got to keep people and forests apart. So where it's appropriate, as for instance in that Great Greece thing, you don't let unregulated developments take place in vulnerable forest areas. You also need to make sure that your emergency services are properly funded. And that means basing the budgets not on what used to happen, because we've changed the baseline. So the problem is they're going to need much bigger budgets than they've got now, because this problem is going to get worse than we're seeing at the moment.
And, I mean, we've been focusing on these wildfires in Portugal. I mean, we have seen, as you say, the same thing in Greece. These are the smaller European Union countries. They have suffered economic problems in recent years. Do they really have the resources to tackle fires on this scale?
They don't really, so in a sense, you're absolutely right about that. The real problem is we've got to stop this problem getting worse. Climate change is like type 2 diabetes. You know, it's a bit asymptomatic, you don't notice it, but if you don't deal with it, it gets progressively worse and worse. So you're already right, those countries can't cope with the current burden, let alone the kind of burden that they're going to have to cope with over the next decade if we don't deal with climate change much more aggressively.
So where does the burden of responsibility fall? Because, you know, there has been the Paris Climate Change Plan. I mean, we've seen what's happened. There is much more of a move towards an individualistic approach, towards unilateral action over multilateral agreements. So, I mean, are we regressing in that sense?
We're not going fast enough. I don't know that we're regressing. I think we're still making progress, but it's much too slow. The real problem, at the end of the day, governments have to tackle this problem. Individuals can play a part in all kinds of different ways. Companies can play a part. But at the end of the day, if governments don't actually invest enough effort politically as well as financially, then we can't really address this problem.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your thoughts on this story. Tom Burke, chairperson of the E3G.